Let's talk about a pretty bold idea. What if there was a way to tackle some of the country's biggest challenges? We're talking everything from historical debts to the future threat of AI, using a private sector plan that costs taxpayers absolutely nothing. That's the huge claim behind something called the NUPA Framework. In this explainer, we're going to break down exactly what it is and how it claims to work.
So let's just start with the biggest headline, because it's a real attention grabber. The idea that the entire U.S. national debt could be paid off for $0. I mean, it sounds impossible, right? But the source material behind NUPA lays out a surprisingly detailed roadmap for doing exactly that. So let's see how they propose to do it.
To get our heads around this, we're going to walk through it piece by piece. First, we'll look at the big problems it's designed to solve. Then, we'll unpack its structure as a kind of economic operating system. We'll follow the money, how it's made, and where it goes, and then dig into the massive projected windfall for the U.S. Treasury. We'll also touch on its plan for an AI labor firewall, and finally, the very specific and limited role that Congress would need to play.
Okay, first things first. You really have to appreciate the sheer scale of what's being proposed here. This isn't just a plan about balancing the budget. The NUPA framework is positioned as a single solution designed to address what its author calls 7 deep, interconnected national crises.
And here they are. I mean, look at this list. We're talking about tackling everything from historical justice issues, like settling the 1865 freedmen debt and restoring tribal economic sovereignty, all the way to future-proofing the economy against AI. The fundamental idea is that one powerful economic engine, fueled by dormant public land, could generate enough momentum to solve all of these at once.
So you're probably asking, how could one single framework possibly do all of that? Well, the key thing to understand is that NUPA isn't pitched as a government program. The source material describes it more like a private economic operating system. Think of it like a piece of software that once Congress gives it the initial green light, just runs on its own based on private contract law, completely separate from federal bureaucracy. The legal machinery that makes all this go is a concept the author calls perpetual sovereignty licensing. Here's the basic idea. Congress would grant a one-time, permanent license for millions of acres of dormant public land, specifically land currently managed by the Bureau of Land Management, and hand it over to these new private entities called community land trusts. Now, this next point is absolutely critical, especially from a policy perspective. These community land trusts are not about building cities or forcing anyone to move. The source material is very clear. They are purely digital and legal entities. Think of them as financial structures that exist on top of the land to generate revenue while the land itself remains untouched. Okay, so these digital trusts are set up to generate revenue. But where does all that money actually go? That's all handled by the framework's economic heart, a really simple distribution model called the 40-40-20 revenue engine. It's actually pretty straightforward. Every single dollar that comes in gets automatically split 3 ways. 40% goes directly to participating tribal nations as what's called a sovereign royalty. Another 40% gets paid out as a dividend to verified descendants of the 1865 freedmen. And that last 20%, it gets plowed right back into the system to fuel more growth, creating this powerful recursive loop to keep the engine accelerating. All right, now we get to the part that, frankly, anyone in Washington is going to be most interested in. Let's talk about the bottom line, the projected fiscal impact, because this is where the framework claims it can wipe out the national debt. First off, and this is a big one, the entire system is designed to run at absolutely zero cost to the taxpayer. Not 1 cent. There are no new taxes, no new federal spending programs. All the operational costs are paid for by a 1% architect fee taken out of the revenue it generates. It's a completely self-funding model. So what's the payoff timeline? Well, the source material points to a series of Monte Carlo simulations, which are basically just advanced computer models that run thousands of different economic scenarios. And the median projection, the most likely outcome, for paying off the entire national debt is the year 2038. How in the world does it get there? The model predicts this enormous tax windfall for the U.S. Treasury, and the source's audit gives it a pretty memorable name, acceptable stream surge. And let's be crystal clear about this. This is not a new tax. It's simply the collection of existing standard taxes on all the brand new economic activity the framework is projected to create. The royalties, the dividends, the new corporate profits. It's essentially creating a whole new massive taxable economy out of thin air. Okay, so beyond just the debt, the framework also has this really interesting component designed to tackle another huge economic challenge on the horizon: mass job loss from AI and automation.
This slide lays out the basic idea. In a typical market, a company looks at a human worker versus a robot, and the human is a variable cost you can always try to cut. NUPA flips that on its head with a model it calls fixed cost arbitrage. The core concept is to use the framework's financial power to create powerful incentives for companies to participate, structurally making it cheaper for them to hire a person than to buy and deploy a robot for the same exact job. It's a market-based firewall for the American workforce.
So if this whole thing runs on its own, outside of government, you're probably wondering, what's the catch? What does Congress actually have to do to get this thing off the ground?
And according to the proposal, the role is incredibly limited. It boils down to a single one-time action, a vote to authorize the license for those 24 million acres of dormant public land. That's it. After that one vote, the government's role is done. The entire framework just runs on its own under private contract law, with no more legislation or federal oversight needed.
And really, that brings us to the core proposition here. The way it's presented is as a pretty stark choice for lawmakers. You can either embrace a private sector plan for a zero-cost economic recovery, or you can stick with the current path. It's a radical idea, for sure, and it leaves us with one heck of a question. Could the biggest solutions actually come from outside of government entirely?